Hey, so the Trans-Canada Highway was built through Banff National Park in the early 1960s as part of a Centennial Road building project leading up to Canada's Centennial in 1967. And right from the start, there was a lot of collisions with wildlife on the highway. And over the years, it was recognized that something would need to be done about that. And the opportunity came in the 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s as the road was divided and made into two lanes each way to handle the additional traffic volume. It was right from the start, fencing was put up on each side of the highway, and you've all seen that as you drive from Banff to Lake Louise. And of course, animals got to get from one side of the highway to the other. And right from the start, a whole bunch of underpasses were put underneath the highway. In fact, today there's 38 underpasses with the fencing. And that's all we had for a lot of years, was just the fencing, the underpasses. We had the highway, and that worked really well. But then wildlife biologists started to notice that some animals, it seemed they weren't comfortable going underneath the highway. The underpasses can be pretty small. Sometimes they're just a small culvert. And especially some prey animals, big ungulates like elk and sheep and deer, they were becoming reluctant to go underneath the highway. And somebody said, this conversation happened in the early 1990s, what if we build some wildlife overpasses? And somebody else said, well, would an animal, like a pedestrian overpass, would animals really use that? We went big on the project. The first one was built in 1997. Here it is here, and an example of the underpass here. This is the overpass. The first one was built in 1997, and this was kind of a situation of let's build it. We don't know if it'll work because it hadn't been done on this scale anywhere in the world before. So right from the start, wildlife biologists did a little bit of research, kind of like a police investigation. So if you take your typical police investigation, you need fingerprints, you need mug shots, and you need DNA. And that's what they did here with the wildlife crossings to see what kind of animals were using the wildlife crossings. For the DNA, a wire with some barbs just a little bit off the ground. Animals rub their belly on it or their back. They leave some fur, run detailed DNA analysis. Is it one animal crossing a whole bunch of times or separate animals? You can get that data. Also for the fingerprints, just some sand traps at the entrance to the overpasses. And then they can just see what kind of animals have been going across based on the paw or hoof prints that are left behind. And then finally, automatic motion activated wildlife cameras. And there was a 14-year study from 1996 to year 2000, and there was just a tremendous number of crossings. And now today we're not really monitoring, that study's concluded, but today more important than monitoring the wildlife crossings is just building more. And we have 6 in the park today, another one in Yoho National Park as well. And actually when they were first built, the elk were a little reluctant to use them. It took a little bit of time. That's what wildlife biologists said would happen. It would take a bit of time, and after a few years they started using them. But when they were building that last one just west of Lake Louise, the wildlife, for some animals, elk in particular, were trying to go across it while the construction workers were still pouring concrete. So they know exactly what these wildlife overpasses are today, and we're quite proud of this system. The underpasses, the overpasses, the fencing. It reduces mortality of animals on the highway for ungulates by close to 95%, and by all animals overall, it's right around 80%. That's what the Park Service tells us. And other jurisdictions are implementing this now. So if you go down to Wyoming on the interstate down there, they have the fencing and the overpasses. There's some in California as well, and a plan to have more here throughout the Canadian Rockies as well, so that we can maybe eventually achieve the dream of the Yellowstone to Yukon wildlife corridor, where animals can go from Yellowstone all the way up to Yukon without having to cross a highway and risk getting hit by a vehicle.